Hey everyone, we're going to start in here with Chapter 14, Career Development Interventions in Community Settings. And some of this may look really familiar because you may have gone over similar topics in other classes. So I just want to point out a couple of these learning outcomes. The first one is to describe the major tasks faced by a community-based counselor. And then we want to be able to describe the various settings in which community-based counseling is provided. Of course, you probably went through that in the intro to clinical mental health course. And that outcome 3, describe the differences and similarities between community-based counseling and those that are provided in other settings. So when you think of clinical counseling, you think of career counseling in a community place, there's a strong and long struggle for recognition. And so Parsons Bureau in Boston was considered community-based. And you may remember he was working with like the YMCA and some other groups. School counseling was the first specialty to be recognized, and it was recognized in the National Defense Education Act. And the reason for the National Defense Education Act is because the Russians beat us in the race to space when they launched Sputnik. And so there was a massive reaction to how are we going to get kids prepared in science and math so that we can be competitive on the world stage. That started in 1958. I just want to point out we're still focused on that today. Our science and math scores have fallen behind other countries tremendously, especially math, where you see countries like Singapore excelling. And so Finland, places like that. So we really have had to refocus on math. The National Defense Education Act funded the training of counselors to work in high schools, and it encouraged studying science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, and finding those students with a lot of talent in those areas. The American Personnel and Guidance Association was developed in the early 1950s, but I want to point out that today that's the American Counseling Association. So it started out as Personnel and Guidance Association. Again, it was heavily vocationally focused. ACA currently has 18 divisions. The one that really serves career development is the National Career Development Association. Dr. Manton and I are doing quite a bit of work with them right now, and Dr. Cesar as well, but mostly Dr. Manton and I, and we're looking at mental health and the way that it's addressed through career development and career counseling. And of course, the effects of mental health on basically the employees' foray into the workplace, through things like disability disclosures, but also how a mental health diagnosis may affect somebody's work. There's not a specific division for community-based counselors, although I would say AMCA is probably the closest, the Association of Mental Health Counseling. Then, of course, we have to think about training and certification. So, of course, now, today, if you're in a CACREP program, you're in a 60-hour program. Most states recognize CACREP, so the minimum for a master's is going to be 60 hours. Some of us had a longer master's degree. Mine was 72 hours. And then on top of that, the PhD for some folks. Career counselors can earn certificates of advanced study, for example, a CAS or a doctoral degree. So you can get a PhD or an EDD in career counseling, and that specialty will come with career development theory and practice. But we also talked about that master career counselor certification and some others. Community-based counseling is the application of counseling principles and practices in agency, organization, or individual practice settings that are located in and interact with the surrounding community. And community counseling requires at least 4 additional competencies: coordination, consultation, advocacy, and case management. I think every counselor should have that. We certainly have to have it for school counseling. So really, I do think everybody probably knows these 4 competencies and knows that they need to have these. Of Coordination is the process of bringing together the needs of a client and the resources of the community. Often your clients may be stuck in a situation where they just don't know what resources are available to them. Maybe they don't have the skills or the technology to look up resources available. And so being able to do that coordination is important, but also communicating and coordinating with other groups when it comes to delivering services. So not just getting a resource for someone, but delivering services. So I'll give you an example, working with St. George firefighters in the community, helping the firefighters to be able to go to group counseling and couples counseling a lot of times means that we need to find childcare for them, and partnering with local churches and other community organizations to provide free or very low cost healthcare can be very helpful to firefighters who may not have a really high income level, and they need to be able to participate in these types of activities. Managing career transitions. For those of you who have a higher education background, you're going to be very familiar with Schlossberg and his 4S model. So he would say for a career transition, we need to define the situation clearly. Is a person transitioning because they just got a degree or some new educational credential? Or are they transitioning because maybe they want to retire from one entity and start a new career? Maybe they just want to change careers altogether. So we need to have that defined. Then learn about the self and our inner resources, and then learn about the support system that does or does not surround the client, and develop a strategy for coping. Now, even if somebody's making a career transition that's very positive, maybe they're getting a promotion, there's still going to be a great deal of stress that is attached to that transition. And so Schlossberg would say, still need to think about that inner self and inner resources, and then the support system. Because even in a positive transition, you may run into a situation where the individual feels really stretched. This can happen a lot in very positive career transitions where a person says, man, I really thought I was ready for leadership, or I really thought I was ready for management, or I thought I was ready for, whatever the next step is. And now I feel totally overwhelmed. Well, there's always a learning curve on every new job. Even if I were to leave LSU and get a job somewhere else as a faculty member, as a professor in counselor education, I would have the learning curve of that institution's policies, the laws, if they're in a different state governing counseling, and just knowledge of the resources and such that are in the community. And so it would be a heavy learning curve. And that's what Schlossberg's getting at. Process for career counseling in an agency setting: identify clients, match clients' needs and community resources. Now, I don't really agree with these steps. Okay. Identify needs and then match resources. I mean, a lot of times the client's doing their own personal work. So I'm not sure that these are the steps necessarily that we would take. But certainly in some type of agency counseling, you will need to know the resources available to the clientele that you serve. All right. Consultation. Consultation is work of one professional with another to find ways to reach a solution that will address the needs of a third party. Now, you see this a lot when you get into talent management and career counseling. So sometimes you'll have a talent manager who seeks the advice of somebody at a career counseling center on finding the right types of employees. We get this a lot with our students at LSU. So maybe you have a group like Exxon and they're revamping their internship program and they want to talk to a career counselor about finding the right interns to match those needs of their organization, but also how are we going to match the needs of students today? And so they may be working uh, with a career counselor who can consult with them about some of the unique needs that students today have and some of the unique ways that they can address those through internship. Advocacy is different. It's the act of exerting pressure on some aspect of the community in order to improve resources available to clients. And I would instead of just saying resources, I would say access. We have a lot of clients that don't have access that they should have. I don't want to get into a political debate here, but certainly we want to think about what is our role in the socio-political environment, and are we voting and acting and out in the community in ways that support every client? Ways to advocate: you can serve on boards of agencies. I've served on a lot of boards. Press for specific legislation. I've been a person who's gone and been an expert witness for various types of legislation. And, sometimes it passes, sometimes it doesn't, but we still keep going. I've also been a person who's gone and spoken multiple times in front of the Bessie Board, which is our Board of Education. So Board of Elementary and Secondary Education for the state. Write newspaper columns. I do want to just make sure you're careful and cautious if you do something like this, because you want to make sure that your perspective is what is seen and that you're not representing the group that you're with. So, for example, if I write a letter that's an op-ed letter to a newspaper, I have to say, I'm Jennifer Curry, the citizen, not Jennifer Curry, the professor, although being a professor of school counseling certainly influences my opinion. You can join protests. I've been involved with lots of groups that do protesting in various ways. I think as you go through your career, if there's certain things you want to protest, I think being a voice out in the community protesting is a very positive thing to do, just to help issues be heard. Write to legislators, have and continue to do it. I will say our legislators have become so polarized, it's very difficult to change how they're going to vote. And then educate others. You see the picture here with the gentleman who's running a workshop. I mean, sometimes just letting people know what the issues are and what resources are needed can be helpful. Case management is a role that is sometimes played. I often think of social workers when I think of case management, but you will have to manage cases, especially if you're going to work long-term with certain sets of clients. The goal is to assure that a client receives the sequence of services, and you really want to have a case plan that you're following or a treatment plan. And then the tasks include coordinating, sequencing such as prioritizing, communicating, and following through. There are some very typical work settings that we see for any type of community counseling. It could be private practice. I hate that they keep saying the World Wide Web, but telehealth, certainly, mental health centers, substance use centers, rehabilitation settings. I would add between substance abuse and rehabilitation, chronic pain clinics. You're seeing more and more LPCs hired at chronic pain clinics to help people with pain management issues. Corrections and probations, job service offices, uh, you know, lots of educational entities. K-20 hires lots of mental health counselors. We look a lot at hiring people even in the college setting. So, yeah, job service offices and one-stop centers, faith-based organizations. Yes, there is Christian counseling centers around town. And so those are some other ways. Also, corporations. You may end up being an EAP counselor. So lots of cool ways that you may be working in the community in clinical mental health, but also interfacing with career needs. All right, see you back for chapter 15.